Is the speaker enclosure more important than the speaker driver? Well, that's an interesting question, and it comes to us from Branko in Toronto, Canada. Branko writes, I once stumbled upon an article explaining the physics behind speakers, and it was quite a revelation. I learned that in a typical room, there's 150 kilograms of air molecules, which is a lot. And all these 150 kilograms of molecules must be properly moved by the speakers in order to achieve high fidelity, or let's face it, sound at all, right? Apparently, it's not just drivers, but the entire enclosure that vibrates together with drivers in producing high fidelity sound. I always liked Wilson's speakers, so when I read this article, I attributed their fancy, huge enclosures and materials inside that reduce resonances. I somehow came to a conclusion that 70% of a speaker's sound quality and value stems from its enclosure and only 30% from its drivers. Does that all make sense? And what do you think? Well, I think you asked some very interesting questions. See if my glasses won't. These are our new speakers. These are the AN3s, and they're kind of naked right now because, well, there's no drivers in them, and there's no side panels. Normally, there's a gorgeous side panel on here, which I think you've probably seen in other in other videos, and again, with apologies to Ohm's Law listeners. But we are looking at these speakers, and they're what, about 4 feet tall, I think, and they weigh on their own, oh my God, 150 pounds without their side panels. So these are beasts. These cabinets are 2-inch thick walls of wood and bracing, and I mean, they're angled structures, and we know that we want to angle, just like we did inside of our room. We angled our walls because, why? Well, we don't like rectangular boxes, right? We like angled boxes because it eliminates standing waves. And so these are all kind of angled back towards the back, all in an effort to strengthen up this structure, to make the walls so that they don't vibrate and resonate. And you can, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. That's less. This front baffle is more. But they're going to resonate a little bit, and we'll get into how important that is in just a second. But I wanted to comment on one of the things that you brought up about costs. So you heard that 70% of the cost of a speaker goes into the enclosure and 30% into the drivers. That's probably pretty, I don't know if 70%. It might be more like 50-50. These enclosures are incredibly expensive to manufacture, to finish, to craft, to ship, to put in a box, and they weigh a lot, and they have to come in trucks, and where the drivers are little small things, tweeters and mid-ranges and woofers, and they're not cheap. Individually, they're fairly expensive, but in this speaker, I'd say about 50% of the money of this speaker that it costs us to build this is in the drivers and electronics, because these are all self-amplified woofer sections with DSP and all that. And the other half is in the enclosure, because yes, they are very expensive to build enclosures and to do them right. And we have worked on this enclosure in our CAD drawing system for more than a year, and hundreds and hundreds of iterations, and our CAD system can show structural strength, and we can design and tweak and change, and Wilson does the same thing, and many other box manufacturers do too. I in particular like to stay away from rectangular boxes, because those are somewhat the worst shape you can have in a box. I mean, in lower cost speakers, you probably can't do a whole lot more, but it's better to have this sort of truncated shape on here. But The enclosure has a lot to do with how the speaker sounds, and of that there is no question. How wide the front baffle is, how much diffraction, the curvature of it, if you're going to time align it or you're not going to time align it, has a lot to do with the way the speaker is going to sound. Of that there is no question. But I would have to say that overall, I believe the drivers and the crossover make more of a difference, and demonstrably so, than the enclosure. Yes, the enclosure is important, but you go upstairs and you listen to the Infinity IRS-5, which is just a sheet of a particle board, and there's no box to it at all. All of that sound has nothing to do with the enclosure. It's actually pretty flimsy, and yet that's one of the best sounding speakers in the world. And it is that way because of the quality of the drivers and the way the crossover is designed. So to answer your question directly, I believe enclosures are incredibly important. They're a very expensive part of this whole process, but as far as contribution to what you're hearing, it is far more important to get the crossover and the drivers correct than the enclosure. Although, as in all of high-end audio, everything matters. So we've given it our best shot in terms of enclosure, and we want something that looks lovely in a home. That's important too, because if you can't put it in your house, then it doesn't matter how good it sounds, right? All right. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.